Hi, Nick here from Pods with Nick and James. Just a quick one before we get into this podcast. I want to say a massive thank you for the support that we've received since starting these podcasts. We thoroughly enjoy it and we look forward to creating more. If you want to have your say on any topics that we've discussed or suggest future topics, then you can do so at www.reddit.com/r/Nick and James Pods. And if you want to support us, you can do so for from as little as £1 a month, and you can do that at www.patreon.com/pods with Nick and James. Anyway, back to the podcast.
Hi, welcome to Pods with Nick and James. I'm your co-host, James. Today we're going to be looking at the history of science and scientific thought and inquiry. My name is James, and we're joined today by the producer and main host of the show, Nick.
Hello everybody, how are you doing? Hope you're well.
And our special / return guest, Adam.
Hello, everyone.
All right, so I've done a fair amount of research into this, and just to start with a couple of shout-outs. First off, thank you very much to the Secret Santa of my old group of school friends who very kindly got me a microphone. I've set it up, and unfortunately I had some technical issues with it, but I've got that on me, and I'm hoping to use that in the next episode when I can get it working properly. And just to give a couple of references, a lot of the information that I've gathered for this has been taken from the Great Courses set of books, specifically the ones to do with the history of science from antiquity to 1700 by Professor Lawrence M. Principal, and the history of science from 17 to 1900 by Professor Frederick Gregory, both of which are amazing charismatic public speakers and know their stuff. I really wish I could suck in more information, but I haven't been able to do that. So I guess we'll just kick this off. Gentlemen, what are your definitions of science? Or actually, wait, shall I direct this to an I'll tell you what, Nick, if you want to go first, what's your definition of science?
I mean, any time thought and process have to be understood, I suppose. So there is a science in, to my understanding anyway, there's a science in anything. If you think about even in the way back when like Neanderthals were creating fire by banging two flints together, and like there's science in that. So the definition of, to me, the definition of science is any kind of process that requires thought in order to execute.
That's really interesting, because that's almost like anything that requires the effort of observation in cause and effect.
Yeah.
Seems to be okay. That's interesting. Adam, how would you define it?
It's along the similar veins of Nick, really. You know, you get anything science nowadays, social science and sort of science and, you know, biology, chemistry. And, you know, everything has some sort of scientific merit behind it, no matter how big or small. Loads of things you mentioned before. So, you know, there was probably some sort of science implemented when the first sandal was implemented and created. You know, so it's, for me, it's more of the case of logging facts and, you know, experimentation and being able to prove and hypothesize.
Okay, well That's interesting because what if I was to tell both of you that the word science didn't exist? Uh, Science or scientist specifically didn't exist before 1834. Um,
What
so
was it called
although,
before then?
well, exactly. So my
Magic,
understanding,
probably.
well, no. But this is the whole thing. Um, so previous to scientists being called scientists, they were called natural philosophers. And it's weird, Nick, that what you described there about kind of like craft and about observing things is just logic. And logic has existed and in thought and in philosophy for thousands upon thousands of years. Like, so science doesn't necessarily have the monopoly on logic and reason, but is more a methodology born from logic and reason. The Oxford Dictionary defines it as the intellectual and practical activities encompassing the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation and experiment, which is kind of similar to what you both said there. But it's interesting that um, logic and reason and people observing things has existed for thousands of years, but it's only recently that has been called science. I tell you what, like I'll just give you guys a quick information dump. The first the person who coined the phrase was an Englishman called William Whewell, who coined the term scientist in 1833 in a lack of a better way of putting it, a magazine publication, to review the work of somebody called Mary Somerville uh, on her work to do with the physical sciences. The way he put it was that when saying how to describe people is art requires an artist. Um, yeah. So if art requires an artist, then science requires a scientist. The work of Mary Somerville was, well, it's interesting so arguably the first scientist was a woman, and yeah, her works included like a whole range of things, but mostly mathematics. So I guess what 1834 is quite late in the history of man.
Yeah,
Regardless of like,
Yeah, it's fairly recent, isn't it?
yeah. So, can you think of anybody who we now think of as scientists who lived before then?
yes, quite a few people, I should imagine. Um, who was the oh, there was I can't remember if he was called a shaman or if he was no, he was a priest, one of the Egyptian priests who designed the pyramids and a load of sculptures and everything else. Um, you could even say Michelangelo. Um,
Well, yes, you can argue a lot of the Renaissance artists, in their own ways, were very practical, hands-on, natural
yeah,
philosophers.
Was it Da Vinci that did the Sistine Chapel?
It was Michelangelo who did the
Michelangelo, yeah,
Sistine
yeah,
Chapel,
yeah.
but Da Vinci did a lot of anatomical drawings, which
Mm.
arguably could have been used as science text notes.
Interesting fact about
Um,
Michelangelo that not many people know. Before he did the Sistine Chapel, he could not paint.
Get out of town.
So what he did when he was grafted in to do the Sistine Chapel roof was he started, this is one of my favourite stories about the Sistine Chapel, he started the furthest point away from the Pope as he possibly could be, in the hopes that by the time he got to where the Pope would be standing, he'd be able to draw.
That's amazing.
So he used the corners as scrap paper, effectively.
Yeah, absolutely.
When I go to the Sistine Chapel, I'm now going to check the corners.
Yeah. I mean, you can't tell the difference. The bloke was incredible from the get-go, but I think it was a difference in I think there was a reason he was drafted in for it. He was a mathematician. He wasn't an artist. He was a mathematician originally.
Yeah.
But this is the thing. There seems to be the way that we categorize knowledge nowadays just did not exist. The way that, it's not that it didn't exist. Where we choose to draw the lines of what subjects are or how to separate subjects is completely separate.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, nowadays, somebody tells you they're into astrology, you assume that they read their papers, they get out crystal balls, they believe perhaps a lot of things that you don't believe, and there's not a lot of respect for it. In the ancient times, if somebody told you they were an astrologer or had a knowledge of astrology, you normally would actually be quite respectful to them, if not backing away, as astrology in modern terms is just predicting people's futures and coming out with little fluff pieces for the paper. In ancient times, it contained astronomy, mathematics, and anybody who studied it could look at the night sky and be able to tell the time to within 15 minutes just by the position of the stars and just using their eyes to figure things out.
Such a lost art.
Yeah.
I tell you what, can you guess where, based on our past recordings, can you guys guess where the first natural philosopher was from?
First natural philosopher?
Yes. Now, specifically, I'll give you guys one clue. It's not Socrates, as they don't classify Socrates as a natural philosopher because he didn't ask the same sorts of questions that scientists ask now. But again, it's massively blurred between philosophy, natural philosophy. If a philosopher just looks at theology and ethics, then they don't count. But if they look at the creation of the world, the production of a system, you know what? I'll bring some other facts in a moment. But the first natural philosopher, the first person who looked at the world and tried to create
understanding
theories,
of,
theories which didn't require mythos or anthropomorphized gods in order to explain the cosmos.
I mean, you probably, if you think about it, your mind immediately goes to ancient Greece. You're thinking like Aristotle and Plato, but it's probably someone a lot closer in time that's you probably think of. Whether or not you think of I don't know, like Karl Marx or like René Descartes or something. That's probably documented as one of the earliest natural philosophers rather than sort of a generalized philosopher.
Well, it's okay. So the first natural philosopher is from the same place as the first king.
So Sumeria, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah, ancient Mesopotamia or Babylon inspired the great thinkers of Egypt and Greece, and the first person who is recorded as being a natural philosopher because of their views on the formation of the universe and the way that they did things is a gentleman called Thales of Mileto. Mileto was a town in ancient Greece which the ancient Greek Empire used to be known as the area of Ionia. So modern day Greece is not quite the same, but you get the idea of the area. Mileto, at the time, so this is about 600 to about between 600 and 500 BC, that this occurred. 200 years ago, money had just kind of started in the world and started spreading through the area, through the city of Lydia, had started that. And then when King Cyrus defeated the Lydians, he then said, these people are using coins, that's a good idea, and then spread it throughout the whole area. And Miletus was the richest city of the time. But there was a bloke there called Thales, who was an astronomer, was a philosopher, and was a natural philosopher because he tried to come up with ideas on what the world was made out of, how the world worked, and he is down as the first natural philosopher in recorded history.
I'd be
Just a
interested to
quick-
find out how much of his philosophies were true.
Okay, so you're absolutely right. He didn't get it bang on. He didn't come up with M theory back in 600 BC. His idea was that everything is water. Everything is, and Aristotle, when critiquing his work, said that, well, I think he believed that because all natural things require water and are filled with water. Additionally, although he was already moving away from any creation myths, both the Old Testament and the Babylonian creation stories start with water, or with the idea of God's spirit, or the God's spirits kind of having this expanse of water to work with originally.
I mean, you can understand the theory. You can understand the basis for the theory. Obviously, water is so vital to any kind of life, and its sustenance. You think the planet itself is 70% water. Our bodies are 70% water. And life itself begun in the water through microbiology with algae and whatnot else. As a matter of fact, without the algae that started the atmosphere, we wouldn't even be on the planet right now.
Well, that's it. Interestingly, a number of ancient philosophers kind of okay, so nowadays we use physics to explain biology. In ancient times, because they didn't necessarily have the wealth of experimentation which now exists, they'd often use biology to explain physics. Aristotle is kind of down as doing that a whole bunch of times. Thales of Miletus was the first natural philosopher. He said that everything was water. He looked at things changing. Just out of interest, can you guys guess how much of his work we actually have, or how many of his writings we have?
I shouldn't imagine too much has managed to survive.
Yeah, withstand the test of time. Either that, or it's every single one is kept pristine in a museum somewhere. It's going to be either or.
Okay, well, again, you guys are bang on the money. We have nothing. We've got bugger all. Like, the only way we know about him and his theories is through Aristotle, who talks about him. So Thales of Mileto is down as one of the sages, one of the seven sages of ancient Greece. but we don't actually have any of his writings.
So kind of
We
on the
just
same
have
basis as to how we first heard about Atlantis through word of mouth, because everything was word of mouth before it was. I mean, I feel like I'm saying one of the most ridiculous comments ever. Of course, everything was word of mouth before it was written down, idiot. Um, but you get what I mean.
not
Like
at all.
it would have been passed on from generation to generation, or
Yeah.
through conversation
Through
to
legend or
conversation.
folklore or
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
Well, this is the thing. Like Thales became a near mythic figure in his own time. One time he is down. He is recorded as, or there are the stories about him are. There are three main stories that are covered with him. He measured the Great Pyramids of Giza by using an ancient measurement tool called a gormon, which is it's like this little stick you put in the ground, then you use the shadows to record things.
Yep.
Weirdly enough, it is literally the same bit that's used in a sundial, but there is an official tool. Um, he measured the Great Pyramids in order to try and figure that out. As I don't know, that's apparently at some point the records had been lost. He also, when he was being mocked for being a poor man, he used his abilities in astrology to predict apparently predict a amazing olive crop, which would occur the next year. So he used what money he did have and bought the olive presses, and then made a load of money that way. Interestingly, that's actually one of the reasons why Aristotle and Plato didn't like him very much, because both Aristotle and Plato's believed that a true philosopher wouldn't use their abilities for personal gain. So they discounted a lot of what he said simply based on that fact.
Because they were jealous.
Well, they had their own they had their own theories, but yeah, that is
The
something
bloke made
that they did.
millions off of a guess that he got the crop date right. So you'd be jealous. I mean, I'm theorising. I'm completely like paraphrasing here, but
No, maybe, like, but he's also down as a really stupid story, which is almost a nothing story, but it kind of shows that stereotypes existed. The stereotype, so he was both the first natural philosopher and the first absent-minded professor. He's also reported to, at one point, he was stargazing and figuring things out and having a walk along at night, and he was looking up at the stars, and it was night. He didn't look where he was going, and he fell in a ditch. And he was mocked by a slave girl who got him out of the ditch and said, Thales, Thales, you know everything about the heavens, but you don't even know where your own feet are standing. So yeah.
fair. I think I would have made the same comment.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, so a lot of... But it's interesting that he's down as the first natural philosopher, but before then, Nick, what you described as science of formation, of counting, of consideration existed in ancient Babylon and existed in ancient Egypt way before Thales. It's just that there was no... It's really weird. There was no how was the world created with both Egyptian and Babylon. Their form of science or their engineering feats were always incredibly practical. It was always... there wasn't necessarily the understanding behind or the questioning of why things work the way they work. It was just, well, this works, so do it this way. Yeah, but
I suppose
another
it being the hypothetical first nation to have an abundance of crop and therefore an abundance of idle minds, they would have been giving birth to the thought processes and therefore started with, well, this works, as opposed to, well, how does this work? That definitely seems like the second thought in the chain, as it were.
Yeah, that's it. Well, just as another bit which I came across in my research, the Babylonians, their numerical system, there's several elements of their numerical system that we still use today. Their numerical system has a base of 60.
Yep.
So both are measurements both are recording of time, and our recording of direction is down to them. So when it comes to measuring time and space, we still use the Babylonian method, which is crazy to think about.
Absolutely. Now, I knew how we got like the compassterial refinement, like as in the minutes and seconds. I knew that was derived from the clock. I didn't know how the day was broken up into minutes and hours, how that became 60 instead of 100. It didn't make any sense to my head, and I didn't know the answer to that question. It's good to have an answer.
Well, yeah, no, and it's so that's why it's because we're trying to use Arabic numerals from I think it's something, it's like, you know what, I can't remember exactly when it is, but it's like thousands of years later, and then interacting them with a system which is several hundred, if not thousands of years older than that. So it's again this mixtures of different times, different knowledge, different systems. You try and put them all together, and you get in a bit of a mess, and that's why, that's why timings are the way they were. Although I think maybe I've done a bit too much research on this again, I'll ask you guys the next question here. When was the theory of the atom first invented?
That's a good question. I mean, my mind immediately goes towards Einstein. However, I feel like Einstein's science was based off of materials that he not fraudulated, developed upon from materials that existed before. So I don't know exactly. I'm going to say Einstein.
Okay.
It's probably a bit newer than that, isn't it? I mean, when was Einstein about?
So Einstein
I can't remember.
Second World War. He's a little bit older than Marie Curie, and actually did his best to support her when she was struggling with the death of her husband, and when she got caught up in an affair. Einstein sent her a number of letters, basically just saying, "Look, don't listen to the papers. You're an amazing person. Keep doing what you're doing."
He was born in 1879 and died in 1955.
Okay, because digging into the repository that is my GCSE chemistry, Niels Bohr, who had the planetary model of an atom, was like 1910-ish. So, but that's a fairly, in depth. We're going to be going to positrons, electrons, and that sort of thing. So it's probably about 100 years before. So 1810.
Okay, so the original philosophical concept of the atom again goes back to ancient Greece.
Really?
Oh, really?
And possibly before that existed in ancient India. Sadly, I only have the stuff on ancient Greece, but there was the word atom comes from the Greek word atomos, which means indivisible. We now know that the atom is splittable, hence nuclear fusion and nuclear bombs and all of that lot. but the original idea of everything being made up of both the void and stuff can be dated back to ancient Greece by in the 5th century BCE. So someone called it's annoying, in ancient philosophy they refer to everybody who wasn't Socrates, Plato, or Aristotle, but from around that time they call pre-Socrates, even if they weren't before, if they were at the same time but not Socrates, they're just called pre-Socrates. But the guy's name was Democritus, and he proposed that matter consists of indestructible, indivisible units called atoms.
It's incredible.
Crazy that they thought that. I mean, I presumed it was a case of things were made up of things, and that's as complex as it got. Like two things, if you hit two things together hard enough, they stick together. So things make up things, and then let's go about our day. I wouldn't have anticipated it be, that in depth the knowledge.
Well, it's crazy to think that even back then people were thinking of this. So this is going to be a bit of this is possibly going to be a contentious question, but I'll ask it. Why do you think nobody listened to him?
Probably because they had better things to worry about.
Well, that's also very true. They probably were struggling with starvation, plague, war, strife, all of the great things that make up.
What did he do?
History.
Was there some kind of ridicule that led to him being disregarded, almost like a fable or a conspiracy theorist kind of thing?
Or was he just not as famous as Socrates? So people just didn't care.
Well, no. The thing is, people did care, but it's because. Well, okay. So again, I haven't been given exact information on this, but it's because although Democritus, who's the second person to come up with it, there was a person before him, but I can't remember his name, and there's not nearly enough information about him. Democritus came up with this idea, and he came up with this idea, but he then also went several steps further and said that there are no gods, there is no ethics, everything. He basically, so although nihilism is down as coming from Friedrich Nietzsche, this guy Democritus seems to be the original nihilist, and unfortunately, a number of people after him called themselves followers of Democritus, and were just massive dicks. It doesn't go into it exactly, but they behaved in such ways that the theory of the atom was lost. I don't know. Almost like
they murked the waters.
Yeah, they murked the water.
You muddy the water, and just no one cared at that point.
Yeah,
they're full of
They muddied the water with their actions to the point where, when anybody thought of the theory of the atom, they thought about these. Yeah, they thought about some not nice people who claimed to be atomists several hundred years later.
Not only that, but it must have been incredibly difficult for a lot of people to hear the concept that there was no God. I mean, even now, people really struggle with the concept of there not being a God, and there being a mere light switch moment that kind of created the universe instead of there being this divine intervention. So you go back to when that was the norm, and that was the majority, and that was the basis of most lifestyle. Somebody turning around and saying, "No, this isn't actually how things go."
The Greeks were fairly hot on gods and the mythology, weren't
You'd
they?
end up almost triggering an existential crisis,
Yeah.
and the fear of that would be enough to have people poo-poo the comments, I suppose.
But that's exactly it. Like, although it's interesting that Athens is seen as the home of wisdom, it was Athens that killed Socrates. It was Athens that quite often did put a number of these philosophers to death, and a number of these philosophers aren't from most of the pre-Socrates or most pre-Socratites aren't from Athens. They visited Athens at some point, for sure, but they're all from the outskirts of the Greek Empire,
Yeah, but
not from
didn't a
Athens
lot of
itself.
them, I think we covered this in an earlier episode, a lot of them were, not a lot of them, some of the earlier people before Socrates, like the bigger minds that Socrates kind of learnt from, Plato learnt from, etc., like they were educated in Egypt through the Library of Alexandria.
Well, weirdly enough, okay, so you are thinking along the right lines. Although, again, the research I've done here has put another light on that.
Hmm?
The library in the Alexandria was founded by Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great was a pupil and died 1 year before Aristotle. Aristotle came after Socrates, if that makes sense. So a lot of these people, you're right, they were trained in Egypt and they were trained in Babylon, but not necessarily in that particular, unless there was already a library there. I can't say there wasn't already a library there, but as the history books say, that Alexander the Great founded Alexandria. Weird enough, he also founded 6 other cities and named them Alexandria. It's just the one in Egypt's the only one that's left. Um,
And even that was destroyed by the Romans.
yeah, that's
Bit,
absolutely true.
bit
Yeah.
up himself, wasn't he?
Well, it is
He
interesting.
was called Alexander the Great, I suppose.
Well, he wasn't at that point, and it is interesting that he learnt from somebody who said you should never use your knowledge for personal gain, and yet the person who told him you shouldn't use knowledge for personal gain also told him, yeah, go invade these countries. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. Spread your light across the world.
Was it seen as liberation and not invasion? I think
Yes,
it
well,
was.
you see, that's a classic thing, isn't it? But
Yeah.
that's a one for
Here we
another
go on our
time,
tangent
but-
train once again.
Exactly. But but it's also weird that mistake of thought also existed. So the first scientist, Mary Somerville, held some of that, and a number of the colonial views held by Darwin were also held by Mary Somerville. And although they were great people and amazing minds, they themselves thought that at their time that the British Empire was spreading its light across the world, and that the ways of darkness and ignorance would be erased by colonialism, which is obviously false. But that is honestly what a lot of people believed, even as late as 1834, and quite a little bit after then as well. Okay, so I've covered a couple of things there. We'll move on to the ideas, to some of the ideas. So the term scientist was coined in 1830. Well, it was written in 1833. It was published in 1834, and it wasn't commonly used until 1840s. Is when it was used. The term natural philosopher, alchemist, crank, a number of things were used to describe scientists before then. How do you guys think the shift from philosophy to science took place? Like, how do you think that went?
I mean, there's a couple of potential. There was either a transitional phase where people went from thinking and hypothesizing to proving or disproving, or it was almost polar opposites and came about as almost anti-philosophy.
Yeah, it's probably where science took on board and could prove things that the philosophers were saying. And at that point, that's the differentiation where the philosophers were hypothesizing, whereas the scientists or people who weren't previously known as scientists, but they could prove and test those theories against evidence and provide that evidence.
That's absolutely right. Like this is where, although the term scientist was coined in 1833, the idea of scientific theory has always seems to have existed across history, but grew in popularity in the 1600s, at least in Western Europe. I can't speak across all history and all times, but that is when our idea of modern science started to take hold. So what you guys were saying about provable evidence, so there. Okay, so I'll just. All right, so before, I guess during the time of the late Renaissance, as we start to enter the Enlightenment, a number of people started meeting and discussing their ideas and what they could show, what they could prove. Unfortunately, it was mostly the rich of this time who had time to talk and to think and to meet. And they started to meet in the salons in France and Germany in the 17th century, or no, sorry, not 17th, 16th century. And there was a thing called the King's Garden in France, which was also a sub of scientific inquiry, and a number of advancements were made in France and Germany before the foundation of the Royal Society of Natural Philosophy was founded in England, which then later became the Royal Society of Science. That was founded in 1660 by, well, I don't have the right person here, I'm very sorry about that, but that was founded in 1660, and it has a very specific term which is on its crest still today, but it kind of really sums up what the place was about. The term is in Latin, as a lot of these things are, and it's nihilus in verbal, or nihilus in verba, which is a Latin phrase which means takes nobody's word for it, or on no one's word, which is a way of... So this was kind of like the first institution which says, prove it yourself, figure it out, and that's in my mind is an amazing step forward for science, or for the formation of scientific inquiry.
Yeah, I mean, I like the definitive nature of the comment. I think, based on, if you think back to the podcast we've literally just we last released, there comes a point where prove it yourself or take nobody's word for it actually restrains how
Yes.
you can
Yeah.
research. So I think the
Yeah.
two need to go hand in hand. I think philosophy itself is the thought outside the box, and then the development on that thought is like not taking someone's word for it, but trying to develop into it some kind of relative proof.
Yeah. So everything is someone else's word in a way, because someone else has already figured it out. So it's how did they figure it out? Because I don't believe them. Okay, well then how did the person that figured it out? and it comes a point where it becomes knowledge that this is correct, no matter how many times you look into it and try and figure out who figured out what and on whose word are we believing. This is just correct.
Well, that's exactly it. Like, although you're right, you shouldn't. The basis of scientific theory is that you should be able to observe and should be able to provide proofs yourself. This is why, actually, this is another reason why. A second reason that the theory of the atom was considered to be disproved is because they didn't have the technological means to look into the nature of stuff. So it was a natural philosophy which turned out to be, at least when concerning the material nature of things, partly correct rather than a provable thing. But then we'll probably start stepping upon first-hand, second-hand knowledge versus subjective and objective reality at this point. So I don't want to go too far into that, or maybe
I mean, just a thought based on that itself. There is a culture in I can't remember exactly where in the world, but it was untouched by human hands, undeveloped, unevolved, shall we say, and remained these hunter-gatherer kind of people that we were talking about in the last podcast, much into the late 18th, 19th, 20th century, right? However, when investigated by a scientist, or when examined by a scientist, they had record of Sirius A as being a part of a binary star system. As a matter of fact, they said that Sirius, like the star system or the star Sirius, was actually part of a tertiary star system, and they had no way of proving it, but they knew hands down that it was a tertiary star system. Given the fact that you can only see Sirius A from the naked eye, Sirius B was only discovered in, I think, the early 20th century, and Sirius B was only discovered in the early 2000s, and yet these people knew and didn't need to prove it, but knew that was the way that things were for literally decades or generations and generations. Kind of it. I mean, you got my thought process in the last podcast, as I said. Like, sometimes you just kind of have to go. Sometimes people just know, and you don't. Sometimes you just have to go. Okay, if you know and there's no reason why you would be lying, then I'm going to listen to you. Be aware of the grey area, but also I don't know enough to disprove you. Therefore, I am not going to tell you you are wrong.
Yeah. I think that's the beautiful thing about science, is that people who, are quite literally remote and don't have any outside influence, 9 times out of 10, well, I say that's probably a bit high, but they will come to the same conclusion on things, and they can figure things out, and you think, oh, wait a minute, they figured that out as well. And there's the constants in science. They might have thought different things when it comes to religion, and different things when it comes to the topography and geography and outside people and this, that, and the other. But when the brass tacks of it is that science is a constant.
Science and mathematics, I think, are the two constants in any society.
Whether or not they use like a generic, a standard, well, we would call a standard based, base 10 mathematical system, or if not, they had their own base system, but
the numbers in sequence are the same though. So you might have a base 13, but like 13, 14 is going to be 13 and 1 to a base 13, whereas it's 14 to a base 10. So it's still
Yeah,
It's still
exactly.
relative, isn't it? It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's almost like writing in a different language. Numbers will be the same no matter what. And science is the same no matter where you are.
Yeah, exactly. It just they go about different ways to proving that, and
Well,
I
I see
very
science
much.
I see science as the methodology. I see like proof. Science is a way of uncovering truth. I don't think. I think science is a way of getting to the answer of the how and possibly the why. I don't necessarily see like when a car hits me. Sorry, if a car hits me and I get injured, like I don't say, oh well, that's science for you. Although I understand that science can be used to explain the physical forces that caused my injuries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you what. Right, we're getting towards the end here, so I'll just ask you guys this: who is your favourite scientist and why? And I'll go last with mine.
Hmm.
Go on, Adam.
It caught me on the spot, James.
I'm sorry, I should. Yeah,
I don't have a collective list of my favourite scientists.
well, I guess name one that you've liked or admired or.
Enjoyed reading the works of Charles Darwin. Whether or not you class him as a scientist, with
I
him
do.
being in like a But
He's very much a scientist. He was after. He was after 18. I'm pretty sure he was.
I think he was around that sort of time.
Before
So
coming out with.
so whether or not he was formally given the title of scientist, or whether or not he was retrospectively given it, I think the work that he's done on evolution, natural selection, was profound, and there hasn't really been anything since that people he seems to have covered a lot of ground. Obviously there was always going to be improvements and people who add to, but I think he's understood and got down a lot of the groundworks that we still understand and use today, be it 150 years later.
No, that's fair enough. Like he's a good scientist, and he was on. Is he still on the back of the £10 note?
Yes. Is he
Have they
not?
changed it? I don't look at paper money anymore.
Yeah, I
No,
can't
that's
remember
fair.
the last time I had. Oh, as a matter of fact, I think I've got a £10 note in my wallet. I'll look at that whilst I tell you mine. So there's a couple for me. I think Einstein, because of the many different things that he, and I use inverted commas here, got wrong, and then was later proven right. I love that. There's so many things that he's like the presence of dark matter, for example. He called it Einstein's greatest blunder, and then scientists went and proved him right to some degree. In later life, and it's like, how can you be so smart that you work out something that is like so fundamental in space, and then go, no, I've got to be a complete bloody moron to think that that's true. So yeah, he's definitely gets an honourable mention from me, but for concept and for the science that they were investigating, my favourite I think is possibly Nicholas Tesla.
Now what? To be fair, I've forgotten a lot about Nicholas Tesla. What can you tell me about him? What did he?
He
Makes
was
good
developing
cars.
a means to draw energy from the universe itself and not need power stations and electrical power grids to distribute that power around the world. Unfortunately, his funding was stopped because the bloke that he was getting funding from was actually the biggest provider of copper wire in America, and he realised that Tesla was about to put the bloke out of business, so he pulled his funding.
That's a massive shame, but that's
That's why Edison got
yeah, that's
the funding,
business.
because Edison's methods were farmable and
Mm.
profitable. Whereas Nikola Tesla, you just put one of his machines in everybody's house and that's it, free power for everyone.
Do you think also that it's the current financial investment in the systems that we have which has stopped Tesla's works from being picked up again?
Yeah, I mean that, and the fact that they destroyed his tower and they destroyed his works. Um, Trump's family was actually one of the families that ended up with a lot of Tesla's paperworks after his laboratories were raided. I want to say, but obviously I use the term loosely.
Okay.
And on the back of a £10 note is actually a
I know it
lady,
was Darwin at least 10
Jane
years ago.
Austen. Jane Austen is on the back of a £10 note.
Okay. Hmm. I preferred it being Darwin, but oh well. Um, but that's just my prejudice. Oh, sorry. Right. Had to be done. Um, okay.
They say pride comes before a fall.
Yeah, always, always. My favorite scientist is Marie Curie. Because well, she's the uh, her and her husband figured out a lot of stuff to do with radiation, and I guess like the reason why she's my favorite scientist is because she went from a time. So she had the hypothesis for how radiation worked. So she kind of worked with people on that. She then also experimented and refined raw materials, which produced um, like she took this substance uh, called pitch and refined it into uranium. She then worked and experimented with uranium and turned it into something which was 400 times more radioactive, called palladium. And then she then continued to research more and more into it and to develop things more and more, and then produced something called radium, which is another 400 times more radioactive than palladium. And so in the course of her lifetime, she took raw materials, refined them into something which is still used today, then made something 400 times stronger than that, and then made something another 400 times more radioactive than that, to the point where radium is an incredibly rare element that's difficult to use. Well, it's horribly deadly as well, but she did
Yeah,
that. Additionally, it's the way she used her findings. So she did the whole. So she created radium. She also started radiology as a medical practice. So the whole reason why we have X-rays is because of Marie Curie's work in radiology. But she didn't just come up with these theories; she practically put it into practice. During the First World War, French soldiers had access to X-ray technology, whereas English soldiers and German soldiers didn't. As a result, thousands upon thousands at least of French lives were saved through bullets being removed from wounds, which previously couldn't have been done because of the X-ray. I know it's going to sound ridiculous, but there were pop-up X-ray kind of tents and vans, which was all put into place by. They used to be called Little Curies, because she put that into place, organized with people, and then created something which saved thousands of lives. So
Incredible.
that's why she's my favorite scientist, because she took a theory, she put in the graft, she created a positive practical application, and then put that into physical practication. So over the course of her lifetime, they went from a place of complete ignorance to having a technology which relied on the same person's work. I don't know. Just over the course of a lifetime, being able to oversee all of that is amazing. Also love the fact that her own remains, because she worked with unshielded radioactive material. Her remains are so radioactive that she's in a lead coffin.
Yeah, she had to be buried twice, didn't she?
Yeah, quite possibly, because it would be doing it. And if you're reading any of Marie Curie's original notes, those are also radioactive, so you have to sign a waiver before you can even touch them. Because she was incredibly irradiated. I guess that's another reason why, she worked with radioactive material, yet still lived into her 60s.
She died because of the radioactive work she did as well, didn't she?
That's the jig isn't up on there, but I'm going to be honest with you, it probably didn't help.
Yeah.
Probably the amount of radioactive stuff she was around, it's probably killed her.
Yeah, I don't think it was cancer that killed her. I think she had some kind of anemia or something.
She did have another disease. Unfortunately, her husband, was it Peter Curie, died of a completely not radioactive thing. He was literally hit by a horse and cart.
Pierre, was it?
Pierre, that's it. Yeah. Cool.
If he was living in Clapham, he'd probably be Peter.
You're right. Well, they were living in Paris, but Marie Curie is Polish. Hence the reason why she called the first refinement of uranium that she invented, called palladium, after Poland. Interesting fact about palladium, it's used as the triggering mechanism in a number of nuclear bombs. So she invented something and put it to good use.
Oppenheimer twisted it and turned it into something destructive.
Exactly. All right. Well, sorry. All right. So science lessens the suffering of humanity in loads of ways, but if, like with all things, can be used for evil. And on that bombshell, I wish you all good night. Unless
Take
you guys
care,
have
guys.
got some other
No,
questions.
I am very happy. That is wonderful research again. Thank you so much for all your time that you've put in, James. Thank you, Adam, for coming along and riding with us.
Thanks for having me.
No problems. No, always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. Thank you, listeners, for continuing your presence on these podcasts. We massively appreciate you taking part in listening. So, goodbye from me and goodbye from the Goyers.